Hello, everyone. Welcome back to On Point Politics. And today I want to talk about my latest 2024 presidential election prediction. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you're new, and make sure to follow the Twitter and join the Discord in the description down below. And without further ado, let's get into this. And so, pretty much, Donald Trump is in a pretty strong position as the former president to win re-election. If we look here, we can see that he currently leads the three-way aggregate by 2.7 percentage points, while he sits at 41.5% to Biden's 38.8%, which is roughly where Biden's approval rating sits at on 538. And what's quite interesting is that if you look at previous historical results, incumbent presidents usually tend to perform around their approval rating. So Donald Trump had a 45.8 percentage point approval rating on election day in 2020. He ended up getting around 46.9, 46.7% of the national popular vote. Obama was like in the 50s range. I think it was 50.7%. He ended up getting like 51.3% of the national popular vote on the 2012 election day. And in 2004, same thing. Bush was around 52%. He ended up getting like 50.7%. So the incumbents usually don't tend to deviate too much from what their approval rating is at. However, Donald Trump is currently sitting at 41.5, but he's always gotten around 46, 47% of the national popular vote. And so if Donald Trump, basically maintains his percentage in the vote share from those elections, but Biden is at 38 and the third party candidates eat the rest up, Donald Trump could possibly be on track to win a landslide election. Now, the way I'm going to predict this election is basically like if I had to bet money right now on what my exact characterization would be in every state, that's what I'm going to put down on this map. So I'm not going to go strictly just based off the model that I have constructed. I'm not going to go just based off polls. I'm going to go based off what I think as of right now. If I had to bet money, what would each of my results for each individual state would end up looking like? I have the 2020 results put up so we can do some analysis on this. I have the model pulled up as well, and I have polling data pulled up as well. And so for the safe Republican states, which I am using plus 10 for the safe margin, by the way, we're going to be filling these in, pretty much all the Great Plains states, basically the Appalachian area. All these states are going to be pretty solid for Donald Trump. I mean, he won all these states by pretty convincing margins, almost all of them by over 20 points, except for Kansas, Missouri, Louisiana, Mississippi. But other than that, pretty much, and as well as Indiana, but basically all of these states went into Donald Trump's column. Alaska and South Carolina, I expect them to be safe victories in 2020 this time around. I mean, Donald Trump won Alaska by around 10 points. I expect him to perform better there. I also expect him to win Nebraska's first and Nebraska at large by a safe margin, including Nebraska's second, which he actually ended up winning by 7.4% here. I expect him to win it by 11 or 12 points on election day. And so if we keep looking at the electoral college map, you're going to notice I'm going to add Iowa and Ohio in the safe Republican column, unlike 2020. You could see Iowa voted for Trump by 8.2 percentage points and Ohio for Trump by 8 points. And the reason why I have them going safe is because if we look at polling data for the election, you're actually going to notice that these states are heavily in favor of the former president as of right now. Donald Trump, and basically he pretty much leads these states by quite a bit. If we look at the Iowa, aggregate, plus 15 for Trump, plus 9, plus 12. They haven't even made an aggregate for it because of how much he's leading by. But it's funny because if you look at 2020, you'll see that Biden was actually only down by like 1.3%, but Trump yet ended up winning the state by 8.2% in 2020. So that's a 7-point underestimation for the former president. So I would expect this to go safe considering all the new polling showing Donald Trump winning at 15, 9 points, 12 points, 9, 10, 13, 10. So he could win the state upwards of like 18 points, which would be a pretty massive win. And it's sort of similar to what I have here. I mean, Iowa is an 18-point win on the model as of right now. But however, I'd say it probably ends up going to Trump by like 13 to 12 points, somewhere in that range. And Ohio's probably like a 10 to 11 point win for Donald Trump. as of right now. For the safe Democratic states, I expect California, Oregon, and Washington to go safe Democrat. I know there was a +1 poll for Trump coming out of the state, and when you included third parties, he was up by 5, but I don't expect the state to vote Democrat. Biden won it by 19 points the last cycle, and it's gone consistently safe Democrat ever since 2004, where Kerry only won it by 7, but ever since Obama came in, he was able to make it a more Democratic state, and Biden actually won the state by the biggest amount for a Democrat, basically since, I believe it's been since forever, actually. It's been a long time since a Democrat has actually won it by 19 points. I believe that's actually the biggest margin that anybody's won it by. Actually, look, since Johnson was the last time somebody won it more than 19 points. So the state has become pretty Democratic. So I doubt it's going to vote under 10. California is becoming a little bit more competitive. If we look at, California's, aggregate, we'll see Biden's only up by 20. He ended up winning it by 29 points. And the aggregate was actually pretty accurate back in 2020. So if Biden's winning it by 20, Trump is clearly improving with all demographics at hand. And so he probably ends up winning all of these by a safe margin, though. Hawaii, I still expect it to be safe. It could get under 20 points, and more than likely it will. If you look at new polling data, Biden's actually only up by 8 points with third parties included. So I do expect, Trump to make a lot of inroads here, but I don't expect it to be under 10 points. It could be a less than 15, on a really good night for Trump, but I don't even think it's going to go under 10 for him. And if you look at all of the Northeast, the polling in New Jersey looks pretty good for Trump, but I'd suspect Biden probably ends up winning New Jersey by like 11 points possibly on election day. It could be closer than that, but for now, I expect him to win it by over 11. And all these Democratic states like Rhode Island, Connecticut, Delaware, I expect all of those to basically go safe Democrat. You could see New Jersey possibly end up going in the likely column. So I may actually put that in the likely column just because the polling is pretty close for New Jersey. As you could see here, Biden's ahead by only 5 points with third parties included. And if you actually look at the 2020 aggregate, he was ahead by 20 points and ended up winning the state by only 15. So if you were to apply that polling error, Donald Trump would actually be within striking distance of winning the state. So for that sake alone, I might actually put in the likely Democratic column. I'd say it's probably like a 9 or 8 point win for Biden. As of right now, that's what I suspect it being. Colorado, more than likely in this scenario, would be a likely state. I mean, Biden won it by 13.5% in 2020. It was a safe state. The model currently has it at a 5.9 percentage point win for Biden. If we look at, aggregate polling, what's interesting is that the latest head-to-head poll had Biden, winning it by about 10 percentage points. However, the issue that I have with that is that I think it's going to get closer. I think the third party voucher is going to really eat into the state overall. And so I think that's going to be a big problem for Biden. And if we actually pull this back up, if for whatever reason it ended up closing on me, but if we actually go back and we look at this, in all the national polling, Biden's ahead by 10 here, but Biden's only ahead by 4, 5, 6, 8 here. So I do think it's going to go under 10 points. I just don't think it's going to be a lean state like it was in 2016. That I don't think is going to happen. Illinois and New York, I'm going to classify them as safe. Yes, the polling in New York has gotten a lot better for, Trump overall. Biden's within striking distance, of losing it under 10 points. The biggest lead he's had was from Siena College with only 800 registered voters, where he was leading it by about 12 points. And that was in the headway matchup. If you include third party votes, he's actually ahead by 10 percentage points. And now in the latest poll, the latest head to head, Biden's actually lost ground in the two-way race compared, from 2 months ago. So the polling is looking pretty good for Trump here overall, considering the fact that Biden won it by 23 points in 2020. Now, I do suspect it vote to Biden probably by 12, 13 points. Illinois is probably going to be like a 10 to 11 point victory. Biden won it by 17 points in 2020. Yes, do I think Trump's going to gain with black voters? Absolutely, but it's definitely not going to be to the extent that some people are claiming, like where he's going to get 25% of the black vote. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. I think he probably gets around 15 to 20%. That's a more realistic range of what we could be looking at on election day. And so for the likely Republican states, I'd put Texas and Florida in these columns. Texas, is a state that has been trending left, but if you look at the border, that state, those areas are really trending to the right. That area actually saved the state for Trump in 2016. If it was not for the border getting more Republican, Donald Trump could have possibly lost Texas last cycle, and it would have been a really bad look on Republicans. But Donald Trump has actually saved the state, and he's even saved Florida to an extent because the state has majorly become more Republican ever since Donald Trump got into politics. He even won it by 1.2% against Hillary, which was also a pretty big surprise because a lot of people thought she was going to win it fairly easily. And he might even be able to win Miami-Dade this cycle, which would be pretty astonishing for a Republican in modern times. He's probably going to flip Duval back. Probably going to flip Pinellas back. Seminole County might be a county he ends up flipping back. In Texas, he's definitely going to make some inroads. I expect him to win it by 8 or 9 points. I think Florida's going to be like a 7 to 8 point win. I think both of these will be big enough victories for him to do pretty well in the electoral college there, and he wins it by 219 so far. Joe Biden's at 190, and we're kind of narrowing down here. Maine's first is going to be safe as of right now. And so we're going to be coming down here. I think New Mexico is actually going to be a lean Democratic state. I think because of, Hispanic trends, I think Donald Trump is going to really make gains here. However, I think white voters are going to keep the state more Democrat since I think white voters on average are going to trend to the left nationally. He was able to win it by 10.8% in 2020. He was in the safe Democratic column. However, I don't expect it to go that way. Another state, however, I do actually think is going to stay likely is Virginia. I think that New Mexico is going to vote to the left or vote to the right of Virginia by quite a significant amount to the point where it's going to be a lot closer. I think about 3 or 4 points to the right. I have this as like a 3 point win for Biden, 4 point win. He's probably going to win Virginia by about 6 or 7 points just because of the white vote share trending to the left. It's a very establishmentarian state. So even if Trump does make some subliminal gains in the rural areas, I don't think it's going to be enough to take over the major city areas in some of these places. And so that puts Trump, basically at a point where he kind of has to focus on the major swing states from 2020 in order to win this. Now, North Carolina, I expect him to probably win it by over 5. He probably wins it by about 6 or 7 points. And if we look at the general election polling, he's currently ahead in the five-way race by about 7.5 percentage points, which would be pretty on par with what I predict. Now, I think it's going to be less than that. It'll probably be like in a 6.5 point victory for Trump. I do expect him to make a lot of gains here from 2020, but I think it's going to be less than what polling suggests otherwise. Now, we're coming down to the traditional swing states. I think Georgia is going to be Donald Trump's first flip. It's going to be his easiest flip of the night. I expect him to win this by like 4.5 points. I don't think it's going to get back to 2016 levels where he was able to win it by 5.1%. However, I do think it's going to shift massively from 2020. The model currently has the state as an 8 point win. Now, do I think it's going to vote 8 points as of right now? Not really. This is what current data suggests. You have to plug in the aggregate and the approval rating of the president and then guess the popular vote, and then that would kind of put you at this point. But if I had to bet money on what things would be looking like a couple months from now, I would expect this to be a pretty big victory for Trump, considering it's become a major swing state recently. I think Trump's going to do fairly well here, about a 4 point victory. This would put him in striking distance of winning 270 electoral college votes. And if we look at the rest of the swing states, I think that New Hampshire is probably a lean state. I think, he won it by 7.4% in 2020. And if you look at 2016, it was competitive. However, it was a lot more to the right of the nation compared to what it is now, where it is voting much left of the nation now. The state's trended left off a cliff. So I don't expect this to necessarily become that competitive. Maine at large, I do expect this to be like only a 1.5 point win for Biden, while New Hampshire's probably like a 3 or 4 point win for him. And so that's where I kind of see that right now. I think Arizona is actually going to be lean for Donald Trump. If you look at the polling, Trump's actually doing fairly well here. He's currently leading the polling by 4.7 percentage points. Now, do I think this is going to be the final lead? No, I think he's probably going to win it by 2 points. As of right now, I think he's going to make some shifts in Maricopa. However, I think overall it's not going to be enough for him to win it by, 3.5 points like he did in 2016. But I think he will win it fairly easily, compared to previous elections. Republicans. And Nevada, I actually think he's probably going to win it by more than Arizona. I expect him to win Nevada by probably 3.5 points. I think major shifts with Hispanics are going to help him win the state by this amount. And so I think that really, if you look at it, I mean, the state basically trended to the left because it voted exactly the same twice, even though the popular vote got twice as Democratic compared from 2016 to 2020. And so the state technically did trend to the right a significant amount. And I think in 2024, Donald Trump probably wins it because I expect Donald Trump to more than likely win the popular vote by like a point or so. And that would put the state of Nevada in the lean Republican column. And he's already at 268 electoral votes. And I think Wisconsin is going to end up going Republican. It was a really close victory in 2020. Biden's approval rating is absolutely in the gutter. And if you look at polling here, you can see in the 5-way race, Trump is up by 1.2%. And polling here tends to underestimate Trump anywhere from like 6 to 8 points. So you could even say that, if you were to apply that polling error, it would actually match what my model currently has right now, theoretically. However, if I had to bet money, I'd expect Trump to probably win the state by a similar margin to Nevada. I think he probably ends up winning it by 3 points. Pennsylvania, I think Trump's probably going to end up winning this by like more than likely, I'd say maybe like 2 points probably. He does end up making a lot of gains in the state compared to 2020, and the polling for him here looks really good. He's up in the aggregate here by 1.6%. Polling tends to underestimate him by like 2 or 3 points, so I'd say a 2 point win is fairly modest as of right now. And I think in Michigan, Donald Trump will also end up winning by a lead margin, probably by like a point and a half here. He probably ends up winning that by a certain amount. Right now in the head-to-head matchup, he leads by a point and a half, but in the 5-way race, he only leads by 0.2, which is pretty interesting. As you could see right here, it's almost like the third parties actually hurt him in Michigan, which is pretty interesting. However, I do expect the polling to underestimate him here, and he probably does end up winning by like a point and a half or so. And that already puts him at 312 electoral college votes and two more places to fill out. Nebraska second, I do think he actually ends up taking it. It's really close, but I think he probably does take it by like possibly a point or so. I think it might be pretty unrealistic for it to be a tilt margin. It's probably going to end up being like a point or two that he ends up taking it by. The latest poll actually does have him up in the state. He actually is up by 3 points in the second congressional district, and with third parties, he's actually up by the exact same amount. So that is pretty good. And this was actually conducted by the Independent Party. That's Osborne. He's running for the Senate seat there against the Republican, and Donald Trump's up in the state by 23 points, and he's leading Nebraska second by 3 points with or without third parties, which is a really good sign for him. And that already, even without the Rust Belt, Trump would actually be at 269 electoral college votes right out the gate, which would be really good for him overall. And the last state here is the state of Minnesota, which I am very conflicted on, but I actually am putting it tilt Biden. I think Biden probably holds on to it by the absolute skin of his teeth. The model currently has him barely losing it, but I think as of right now, he probably does barely hold on to it. The polling here does not look good for Biden compared to 2020 at all. If we look at the 2020 aggregate, you could see he was up here by 9.2%. He ended up winning it by a somewhat similar margin. You could see the polling here, plus 15, plus, 13, plus 9, 8, 11, 15, 14, 10, 3, 6, like absolutely crazy numbers in the state of Minnesota. Meanwhile, now he's actually either slightly up or he's down in certain polls. And actually, with McLaughlin Associates, he's actually up 5 points without RFK, but the rest of the third party candidates in it, he's actually up. And in a regular two-way matchup, he's up by 3. And with third parties, he's actually tied with Biden, which is interesting, but I think he's still leading it in the statistical tie. However, I'd say Biden probably barely holds on to Minnesota right now. I think even though the Israel-Hamas conflict is hurting him as well as major issues, I think he probably barely ends up eking it out as of right now. And that puts the election at 313 electoral votes for Donald Trump to Joe Biden's 225 electoral college votes. And so if you guys did enjoy the video, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to follow the Twitter and join the Discord in the description down below. And I will see you guys very, very soon.